The lunch crowd at Bellamore Estate restaurant fell into complete silence the moment the crystal plate crashed against the polished marble floor. Every fork stopped moving. Every waiter froze. Every wealthy guest turned to stare as the city's most feared mafia boss slowly stood from his chair, his cold eyes fixed on one woman who had spent her entire life trying to disappear into the background. In front of dozens of powerful people, he wanted to remind everyone that kindness meant nothing in his world. He believed power was earned through fear, not compassion. What he never imagined was that the woman standing before him carried a strength no amount of money, violence, or influence could ever buy. Before this day ended, the man who had broken countless lives would find his own heart shattered by the one person he thought was too ordinary to matter. Before we begin, if you believe kindness is stronger than cruelty and that everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Heart of a Dad for more emotional stories that remind us humanity still exists. The woman's name was Marisol Vega, a 34-year-old waitress known throughout the restaurant for treating every customer with the same warm smile regardless of whether they ordered a simple sandwich or an expensive feast. She had never considered herself beautiful by society's impossible standards. Years of caring for her aging mother while working double shifts had left little time to think about appearances. People often judged her before learning who she truly was, but she had learned that a gentle heart could survive even the cruelest opinions. Across the city, another name inspired fear instead of respect. Vincenzo Moretti controlled businesses, politicians, and criminals alike. Newspapers called him a successful entrepreneur, but everyone who knew the truth understood that his empire had been built through intimidation and ruthless decisions. His employees never questioned him. His enemies rarely survived crossing him. Even those closest to him believed he had forgotten what compassion looked like long ago. That bright afternoon, Bellamore restaurant prepared for Vincenzo's arrival as if royalty were coming. Managers inspected every table twice. Chefs remade dishes over the smallest imperfections. Security guards quietly watched every entrance while expensive cars lined the driveway beneath the summer sun. Marisol had no interest in serving powerful men. She preferred elderly couples celebrating anniversaries or tired parents sharing lunch with their children. They reminded her that love still existed beyond wealth and status. But fate had different plans. When Vincenzo entered with several associates, conversations faded into whispers. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, he walked through the dining room without acknowledging anyone around him. His expression suggested that every person in the building existed only to serve his needs. The restaurant manager nervously assigned Marisol to his table after another waitress suddenly claimed illness. Fear spread across the staff, but Marisol simply nodded. Every customer deserved professionalism, no matter who they were. She greeted the table politely, carefully took their orders, and returned to the kitchen. Everything seemed normal until one of the cooks accidentally switched two nearly identical gourmet dishes. Neither Marisol nor the chef noticed the mistake before she carried the meals outside. The error became obvious only after Vincenzo tasted his first bite. His chair scraped loudly across the floor as he stood. The elegant dining room fell silent. Without warning, he pushed the plate away, sending expensive porcelain crashing onto the marble tiles. His sharp voice echoed through the restaurant as he criticized the service, accusing the staff of disrespect and incompetence. Marisol apologized sincerely, accepting responsibility even though she had not prepared the meal. She promised to replace it immediately. Instead of calming down, Vincenzo stared at her with icy disappointment, making careless remarks about how someone who looked like her should never have been trusted in a fine restaurant. His words were aimed at her worth rather than the mistake itself, and although they were not shouted, they cut deeper than broken glass. The room remained painfully quiet. Wealthy guests avoided eye contact. Some looked uncomfortable. Others simply watched, unwilling to challenge the city's most dangerous man. Marisol felt tears gathering but refused to let them fall. She bent down, quietly gathered the shattered pieces from the floor, and carried them away with dignity. She would not allow cruelty to define who she was. The incident spread across the restaurant within minutes. Several younger employees cried in the kitchen after witnessing what had happened. They expected Marisol to quit. Instead, she calmly prepared the replacement order, checked every detail herself, straightened her uniform, and returned to the dining room with the same respectful expression she had worn all afternoon. For the first time in years, Vincenzo looked genuinely confused. Most people reacted to him with fear or anger. This woman responded with grace. She placed the corrected meal before him without resentment and quietly wished everyone a pleasant lunch before walking away. That evening, after finishing another exhausting shift, Marisol stopped at a neighborhood grocery store before heading home. Her mother needed medicine, and every dollar mattered. As she waited in line, she noticed an elderly man collapse near the entrance. Without hesitation, she rushed to help. She supported his head, called emergency services, and stayed beside him until paramedics arrived. She never asked whether he was rich or poor. She didn't recognize him. But someone else did. One of Vincenzo's bodyguards had witnessed the entire scene from across the parking lot. The elderly stranger happened to be Father Aldo Romano, the retired priest who had once rescued Vincenzo from homelessness after his parents died decades earlier. Few people knew the story. Even fewer knew that Vincenzo secretly paid for the priest's medical expenses every month without ever visiting him. When the bodyguard informed Vincenzo what had happened, the mafia boss said nothing. Late that night, curiosity overcame pride. The next morning, instead of sending investigators, Vincenzo drove alone to the modest apartment where Marisol lived with her mother. From his parked car, he watched her carefully prepare breakfast, help her mother with medication, water dying flowers on the tiny balcony, and leave homemade meals outside the doors of two elderly neighbors before walking to work. No cameras followed her. No reporters applauded her. She expected nothing in return. For the first time in many years, Vincenzo questioned whether strength might look different from everything he had ever believed. Days passed. He quietly returned several times, observing from a distance. He learned that Marisol volunteered every Sunday afternoon at a community kitchen serving struggling families. She donated part of every paycheck despite having almost nothing herself. Children smiled the moment she entered the room because she remembered every birthday and every favorite meal. Meanwhile, Vincenzo spent each day surrounded by expensive suits, luxury cars, and people who obeyed him only because they feared him. The contrast haunted him. One afternoon, Bellamore restaurant experienced an unexpected crisis. A gas leak forced an emergency evacuation just as several customers began panicking. Smoke filled part of the kitchen. Without thinking about herself, Marisol rushed back inside after hearing that a frightened little girl had become separated from her parents. Moments later she emerged carrying the terrified child safely into the sunlight while firefighters arrived. News cameras captured the rescue. The story spread across the city before sunset. People praised the anonymous waitress whose courage had saved a life without hesitation. Watching the television report alone in his mansion, Vincenzo lowered his eyes. He remembered every harsh word he had spoken. He remembered the silent strength with which she had accepted humiliation. For the first time since becoming the most feared man in the city, shame settled heavily on his shoulders. The following day, he entered Bellamore restaurant again. Employees immediately became nervous. This time there were no business partners, no bodyguards surrounding his table, and no arrogance in his expression. He requested only coffee. When Marisol approached, she remained calm and professional, treating him exactly as she treated every other customer. That simple kindness hurt more than hatred ever could. He quietly apologized. Not because his reputation required it. Not because cameras were present. Because he finally understood that real dignity belonged to the woman standing before him. Marisol listened without interruption. She did not celebrate his regret. She did not insult him in return. She simply explained that words spoken in anger often remain in people's hearts long after the speaker forgets them. Respect, she said, costs nothing but can change someone's entire life. Those few sentences echoed through Vincenzo's mind for weeks. He began making decisions that surprised everyone around him. Employees received better working conditions. Families harmed by his business practices quietly received financial compensation. Several illegal operations disappeared almost overnight. Even his closest associates wondered what had changed. The answer was simple. One ordinary waitress had shown him a form of courage that fear could never produce. Months later, Bellamore Restaurant hosted a charity luncheon benefiting local children's hospitals. Instead of sitting in the place of honor, Vincenzo requested the simplest table in the room. When the event concluded, he publicly announced a major donation, not in his own name, but dedicated to the everyday people whose quiet compassion held communities together. He never mentioned Marisol directly. He didn't need to. Everyone who knew the story understood exactly who had inspired the change. Marisol continued living much as she always had. She still worked long hours. She still cared for her mother. She still smiled at strangers and remembered birthdays at the community kitchen. Her life had not become easier because of wealth. It had become richer because she never allowed bitterness to replace kindness. Sometimes the strongest people are not those who command armies or build empires. Sometimes they are the ones who choose compassion after being treated unfairly. They remind us that dignity cannot be taken away by cruel words unless we surrender it ourselves. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to Heart of a Dad. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire hope, forgiveness, and the quiet power of kindness. Before we end, tell us in the comments, what act of kindness has changed your life forever? We would truly love to read your story. As the afternoon sunlight poured through Bellamore's tall windows one final time, Marisol smiled at another customer who simply needed a warm meal and a little kindness. Across the room, Vincenzo quietly lowered his head in gratitude, understanding that the greatest victory of his life had never come through power or fear. It came through the courage of one ordinary woman who refused to let cruelty define her heart. And in choosing compassion over revenge, she accomplished what no rival, no fortune, and no weapon ever could. She broke the hardest heart in the city and proved that true strength will always belong to those who choose kindness.